If you, dear father, do not take the trouble to check her, she will be fixed forever as the silliest and most determined flirt who ever made her family ridiculous. And Kitty will follow, as she always does.
Lizzie, we shall have no peace until she goes.
Peace? Is that really all you care about?
Lydia Bennet is usually remembered as the girl who ran away with George Wickham, nearly destroyed her family's reputation, and somehow came out of the whole catastrophe married. And if we reduce the story to its simplest version, the explanation seems obvious. Lydia was foolish, Wickham was wicked, and Darcy had to clean up the mess. But the story is rarely that simple. Because Lydia doesn't suddenly become reckless when Mr. Wickham enters her life. She was already reckless. She doesn't suddenly become obsessed with attention. She had been chasing it for years. She doesn't suddenly believe that marriage is the ultimate prize. Her parents have actively and passively spent years teaching her that marriage is the grand solution to a woman's problems. Wickham didn't create Lydia's weaknesses. He discovered them. And that's what makes the whole Lydia Wickham story considerably darker than the usual naive girl falls for a charming rogue interpretation. Mr. Wickham is absolutely responsible for what he does. He is manipulative, selfish, and shamelessly opportunistic. But Lydia is vulnerable to him because she has been raised in an environment where almost nobody has taught her how to recognize consequences before they arrive. The Bennets didn't create Mr. Wickham, don't get me wrong, but they did create the opportunity for him to succeed. And perhaps the most uncomfortable thing about Lydia's story is that the problem with Lydia was never simply Lydia. But before we jump into my latest rant, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's get into it. The first thing to understand about Lydia is that she isn't simply behaving badly. She has been rewarded for being badly behaved. Lydia is loud. She's excitable, flirtatious, and completely unconcerned with whether the room is ready for whatever she's about to do next. She and Kitty practically orbit one another, but Lydia is clearly the more dominant personality. Kitty follows, Lydia leads, and nobody seems particularly interested in stopping her. Mrs. Bennet certainly isn't. She even actively encourages Lydia with her great obsession of marriage. Everything comes back to marriage. A wealthy man arrives in the town and suddenly the household is in a state of emergency. The daughters are to be displayed, evaluated, and married off before someone else gets there first. And Lydia, she absorbs this lesson perfectly. Marriage is not something you prepare for. Marriage is something you win. There's a difference. Look, Elizabeth understands that marriage involves affection, character, compatibility. Jane, she wants love, but also possesses a remarkable amount of emotional restraint. Even Charlotte, who is considerably more pragmatic than anyone else in the story, understands that marriage is a serious economic arrangement. Lydia, meanwhile, sees the entire thing as some kind of adventure. And why wouldn't she? She has been given very little reason to think otherwise. When Lydia and Kitty behave foolishly, their father often responds with amusement rather than intervention. Mr. Bennet is intelligent enough to see his family's absurdities, but frequently he treats them like some kind of material for entertainment. It's one of his most charming qualities, but it's also one of his worst failures as a father, because sarcasm is not discipline. Mr. Bennet can see that Lydia is ridiculous. He even says it himself. He can joke about it, but recognizing that your child is behaving badly and actually doing something about it, those are two very different things. And Lydia needs the second option. She needs someone to tell her that being the center of attention isn't the same thing as being admired, that a man flirting with her isn't necessarily interested in her future, that running away with a man she barely knows isn't a romantic rebellion, but an irreversible decision with consequences far beyond herself. Instead, she grows up in a household where foolishness is often tolerated until it becomes inconvenient. And that is where the real problem lies. Lydia learns that embarrassment is temporary. She has no reason to understand that some mistakes are much more than cute phases. Then arrives Mr. George Wickham. And this is where Lydia's story becomes particularly tragic. Wickham doesn't need to manipulate Lydia into becoming someone she's not. He simply gives her exactly what she already wants: attention, excitement, romance, and most importantly, the feeling that she's suddenly an adult. Lydia doesn't know Mr. Wickham particularly well, but she doesn't need to. She has already decided what he represents. He's handsome, he's a soldier, he's charming, he's socially confident, and unlike the older men around her, he doesn't treat her like a silly child. He treats her like a woman. Or at least he performs the role convincingly enough. And that distinction is everything. Because Lydia doesn't fall in love with the complicated man underneath Mr. Wickham's charm. She falls in love with the story he allows her to tell herself. And that is why calling Lydia merely stupid misses the point. She's inexperienced. And those are not the same thing. Lydia has never had to distinguish between attention and affection. She's never had to think seriously about what makes somebody trustworthy. She's never had to understand that a charming person can have really terrible intentions. Mr. Wickham, on the other hand, understands people very well. That is one of the reasons he's so dangerous. His biggest and greatest talent isn't lying at all. It's telling people the lie they most want to believe. With Elizabeth, he gives her a villain in Darcy. With Lydia, he gives her a romance. He doesn't have to invent a fantasy from nothing. He simply steps into the fantasy you have already built in your head and gives it a handsome face. So for Mr. Wickham, Lydia is an especially convenient target because she doesn't yet understand the value of what she's risking. She hardly thinks of anything beyond her orbit. So she doesn't realize that her reputation isn't just hers. Her family's reputation is tied to hers. Her sister's marriage prospects can be affected by her behavior. Her family's financial security is already precarious. None of that matters though, because she has spent her entire life in a world where the consequences of her behavior have been absorbed by somebody else. When she makes a spectacle of herself, Elizabeth is embarrassed. When she causes trouble, Mrs. Bennet panics. And when she finally runs away with Mr. Wickham, Mr. Darcy intervenes. Notice a pattern? Lydia acts, other people pay. And that is why Wickham is able to do what he does. He doesn't just exploit Lydia's innocence. He exploits the fact that Lydia has never been forced to understand the cost of her own choices. There's something almost cruel about the way Lydia's story ends. Technically, she gets what she wanted. She marries Wickham, the scandal is contained, and the family survives. And Lydia is delighted. The film makes this especially telling because she doesn't come home transformed. She's still Lydia, treating the whole thing like an adventure. She thinks she's won. She has a husband, she's beaten her sisters to the altar, and she's suddenly the center of attention. But in reality, she has married a reckless, financially unstable, and deeply selfish man. And somehow the Bennets, bar Lizzie, are relieved. Why? Because the crisis has been solved by marriage. Not because Lydia is safe, not because Wickham has changed, simply because they're married. And that says everything about what Lydia has been taught to value. Her parents had years to teach her that her choices had consequences. Instead, they allowed her recklessness to pass as youthful silliness until she made a genuinely adult decision. But Lydia isn't blameless either. Let's not even get that wrong. She chooses Mr. Wickham, she chooses excitement over caution and ignores the warning signs. So she's neither innocent victim nor simply a foolish girl who got what she deserved. But she is responsible for the choices she was never properly prepared to understand. Mr. Wickham exploits her immaturity. The Bennets fail to correct it. And Lydia makes the choices that bring the disaster about. That's what makes her story tragic rather than just merely foolish. If you've stuck around this long, you must like something here. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I really enjoy making these. With that, you can tell that you also enjoy watching them. So thank you. So here's my final verdict. Lydia Bennet is easy to dismiss as the silly girl who ran away with an abominable man and nearly ruined everyone around her. But that misses the real tragedy. Lydia didn't simply meet Mr. Wickham and suddenly become reckless. Like I said, she was already reckless. Mr. Wickham just understood exactly how to use that recklessness. The Bennets gave her little discipline, little sense of consequence, and one overwhelming lesson. Getting married was the goal. Lydia followed that lesson to its most disastrous conclusion. And she isn't blameless. Again, she chose Mr. Wickham. She ignored the warnings. She wanted the excitement, but she was also a girl who had never been taught to recognize the difference between being desired and being valued. That is why Mr. Wickham is so dangerous. He didn't have to change Lydia. He only had to give her what she'd already been taught to want. And perhaps that is the real failure of the Bennet family. They prepared Lydia to become a bride, but never prepared her to choose a husband. Wickham is a terrible, terrible man, but he didn't create the Lydia disaster. He just finished the job.